Alright folks, let's start with this very simplistic base from CA3D Studios. This just has a pretty cool little cat design in the bottom of it, and this is a very simplistic version of Black Cat. CA3D Studios actually lets their patrons vote for different versions of characters and different characters, and in this case the community actually voted for two versions of Black Cat, and you saw me do a version of Black Cat a few weeks ago. And this is the other version of Black Cat that they had done, so they were actually done at the same time. And as you can see, what I'm doing here is I had already primed this base in black, and I'm just filling in this cat part with white. Now, when you're brush painting with white, you do want to thin it down with some water, and as you can see, I'm using the Pro Acryls in this case, and it will take a couple coats, so just be patient. Now, this is a very simplistic model, but we don't just want to paint it black and call it a day, because that's boring and not a lot of fun. So what we're doing is we're going to add in some Dunkelgrau, which is very common in what I do. This is essentially my black recipe, if you will. This is my black leather or black suit recipe. So you'll see this quite often on my channel, so get used to this little recipe of Dunkelgrau over black. And sometimes I drop my models and don't cut it out because, you know, what's the fun in that? But what I'm doing is I'm putting this dark gray over top of areas that are highlights, right? So like her chest and her hips and her butt there, her cheeks. We're just basically capturing where all the light would catch. And then here I used ocean blue. You can essentially use any kind of like just a dark blue or gray blue color to actually add another level of highlight if you want in those areas. So essentially the bigger highlight area was the gray, and then we're putting a little bit of the gray blue in the smaller highlight areas and like along her ribs there, just to help bring out some of the details, because if it's just black it's going to be boring. So we will be varnishing that later to really make it look good, but varnish doesn't show up well on camera, so you won't often see me varnish in my videos, only because it doesn't show up very well. So, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. This is a very simplistic suit in that it's black with white stripes, and she does have her white fur on her forearms and whatnot. But what you see me doing here in the background is I'm just painting in the white. This is the same exact white that I used on the base before. I'm just painting in all these many lines that are on this model. Now, one thing I should note is that this model is a little bit smaller than a lot of the others I do. So this is about as small as I like to go. This is a 1/9 scale character. So she stands at about 8 or 9 inches tall at 1/9 scale, which is, it's a nice size. I do like them a little bit bigger just because I can airbrush more, but this size is about as small as I go, just because anything smaller makes it almost impossible to do much airbrushing. So anyway, that being said, you can see I did all the stripes on the arm, and now her foot here we can actually airbrush this on, and what I did was just took some tape and just taped up around the upper edge there. You don't have to mask up everything if you can control where your overspray is going. Special thank you to my patrons that support my work. If you're interested in daily vlogs, how-to videos, high-resolution photos, early access videos, discounts at my store, and free printable files, check out my Patreon and see how you can get exclusive access to all this extra content. Alright, continuing on with the stripes and whatnot from her feet, we're just going to do the same thing we did on her arms, and you just see that I'm just taking a, I think this is number 1 brush, I'm just going along, or 1.5 actually, now that I see the side of that, it's a 1.5 brush. This is a Marta Kalinsky brush, which is what you'll see me use a lot on this channel when I'm doing any kind of brushing, because Marta Kalinsky brushes are just a very high quality brush. The paint really flows well from them. And interesting fact about Marta Kalinsky sable brushes is, I was like, I don't know what Marta Kalinsky means, but it actually is a very particular type of weasel hair, and that's what makes it special. So Marta Kalinsky sable just means weasel hair. So I think I need to get some weasels and like pluck their hair and sell them, because these brushes aren't cheap either. But they are very good quality. So here we can see what she looks like with all the white painted. Now, when you go through this, CA3D did a nice job of giving us a channel essentially to paint, but we are going to have to fill in some lines, and I'm going to do that here with some just black paint. I'm just going to clean up the edges with the black paint, so we clearly define the edges of the white channels with black paint. And again, that's just to make sure that the lines look nice and clean. So again, I'm just taking another fine brush here, and I'm just going along the edges of that white channel with just some flat black paint. And here you can see I'm doing the same thing on the shoes. I'm just trying to, again, fill in the lines that we see here for her soles of her shoes, which is kind of nice. Is that the sole or the heel or whatever that part of the shoe is? It's the bottom part of the shoe. You know, the part you walk on, we kind of paint it black to make it stand out. And there we can see what she's continuing to look like as we go along. And you can see how we don't have to add highlights and shadows into the white part, really, because it is kind of a small detail. So, but the gray highlights and the blue gray we did earlier really stand out well. And here we're just attaching her arms in place. And, you know, a good modeler design, like someone who does a good design, they will make it so the arms match up without big seam lines and whatnot. It's really, really helpful on the design side of things. And CA3D Studios does a great job with their design. This is actually one of their older designs. This is probably a year or so old, and it's still really, really great. So anyway, moving on to her skin tones. You can see I had already primed her in white, which is very important. And then I painted in pink. And now you see this is actually my latest version of my skin recipe, because I swapped out the old AK skin ink and I replaced it with carmine. So this entire recipe uses only Atom paints now, which paint so smooth out of an airbrush. They also are good for brush painting too, by the way, but when you're doing skin tones, you really want to avoid brush painting, because skin tones ruin everything when you try to brush paint. Like brush painting ruins skin tones, in my opinion, unless you're really good at blending, and it's not exactly easy. But airbrush makes everything blending so much easier. So you saw I did the carmine in the shadowed areas, did the warm skin as a base coat. I put some dark nude pink in the shadowed areas, and the idea then is to blend the warm skin and the dark nude pink with this beige pink. It's a very nice shadow skin color that's not too pink. And after you blend those two edges together, then you're going to use light skin like a zenithal from above. And this skin recipe works really, really well, but I have to stress the importance of making sure that you're using the recipe along with the different angles so that you get the desired results. If you're a collector or an artist, check out my website at relentlessstormmodels.com, where you can browse a growing library of over 400 models to choose from. I'd love the opportunity to print and paint a model to add to your collection. Unpainted kits are also available for purchase. For commission requests, send an email to relentlessstorm7@gmail.com and I'll be happy to work with you. Be sure to use code STORMYT2024 at checkout for 10% off your entire order. I also have listings on eBay and Etsy, but my entire library can only be found on my Shopify site, relentlessstormmodels.com. With skin tones out of the way, we can focus on her portrait now, and she has her little black cat mask on, which is very common amongst a lot of these comic book characters. And what we're going to do is just take, again, our fine brush, and we're going to use black all over the just the mask parts. And one of the things you want to pay attention to here is how I'm holding the model and holding my brush. You notice my brush is almost always in the same exact kind of location, same exact way I'm holding it. And what I'm doing is that the edge that I'm painting towards is always on top of my brush, not underneath it. And that's a really good habit to get into if you want to avoid painting like over the edge and painting onto an area you don't want to touch. And that's how she looks after you get all the sides done. So I've been using the Pro Acryls for this fine detail painting because it just flows so well off my brush. And as you can see here, I'm just using black, and what I'm doing is adding in like eyeliner and then doing also her eyelashes. And this is a great place to start because it essentially is like you're painting the lines that you're going to paint within then. And since you're going to be starting with black, if you accidentally get any white or anything on the black from when you start painting the eyeballs and stuff like that, it's not a big deal. You just paint back over it in black. So I know as much as this seems like a daunting part, it's not too bad. and it's really forgiving. So after I did the black, I just decided to paint the lips for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't really have a good reason. I just decided to, and that's what I did. So we're going to talk about it. And I'm just using, I think this is like a vintage pink color, I think it's called, from Adam Ammo Paints. So Adam, if you hear me say Adam Paints, it's Ammo of MIG, it's the paint brand, and Adam is the paint line. It's their latest paint line they came out with, and it's really, really awesome. I actually did a review about it way back when it first came out. I actually pre-ordered their stuff and then did a review on it, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm using that same vintage pink on the corners of her eyes to do the fleshy part of the eyes, the pinky flesh parts. So like where her tear ducts are, and then on the outside of her eye. So, you know, if you look in a mirror, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you don't look in a mirror to know what your eyes look like, well, then how would you know how to paint your eyes? So I did the little pink part, and then what I'm using is, I use ivory, so it's a slightly off-white color for the white part of the eyes. And this may look like it's easy, and I'll say that it takes a lot of practice, and me trying to do it while recording for you guys is really, really difficult. And this head is 1/9 scale, and honestly, if you're going to practice portraits, I would suggest printing in like 1/4 scale or larger. If you want to just do like busts or something, I highly suggest that to practice. But you can see what I'm doing here is I have a very fine brush. I think it's a 0 brush that I'm using. I'm sure it's a 0 brush. And I'm painting in the part of the colored part of the eyes, the iris, but I start with black. Because again, it kind of works like an outline. And if you ever look at an eye up close, look at reference photos, the eyes are actually very dark on the very edge. So if you start with black and then fill in the entirety of the black part, with the exception of just a very thin line on the edge with your color, in this case we're going to go green. We're starting off with like a nice green base color, and we leave that edge black. It actually looks really good. And what you see I'm doing here is I'm actually bringing in a second color of green that's very light, because most eyes aren't just one color. So what I did here was a darker green, then a lighter green, and then I'm taking a very, very nice tipped brush, and I'm painting in the pupil of the eye in the center there. And you can see how her entire iris isn't visible because of the kind of the angle she's looking at. She's kind of like looking up and to her left, so only the bottom part of her iris, and you can just see the pupil at the top of her eye. So really cool. Make sure you have reference photos. I always have reference photos. As a matter of fact, my phone is sitting there in the corner. That's the black thing. It's my phone sitting there. I have the reference photo up as well. So please use reference photos. I highly recommend it. If you want to get good at painting portraits or painting any model, reference photos is key. So what I'm doing here is I am putting a gloss varnish on her lips and eyes. This is a very, very important step if you want to sell the realism of your model. It just really adds a nice effect. Very important that if you want to put a matte varnish on your entire model to protect it from damage, that you do that before that step, or else you're going to lose the effect of your gloss varnish. So we do have her portrait done, but we also have her fur, and I wanted to show you how I did her fur bits on her, because I don't like flat hair. I think flat hair makes it look like a toy, and I don't make toys, I make art, and I would hope that everyone would feel the same about this. So what I did, even though her hair is white, I wanted to add some volume, and even if you've seen anyone with white hair, usually like the base part is like gray because there's volume and the light doesn't hit it, and it creates shadows, and the shadows are a gray color. So I started with a Schwarzgrau, which again, it's a German tank color, but it's essentially like I would call it like a medium gray. And then I took this white dry brush paint from Ammo and a dry brush, and I'm actually dry brushing on the white parts. And what that does is just adds the volume. And here's the thing. It not only does it add volume, but it's using contrast to create the volume. And if you don't like this, and I'll show you, because I actually didn't like how it turned out. If anything, I probably could have used a lighter gray than what I did, because it almost seemed too gray. So what I wanted to do was essentially reduce the contrast, and one way you can do that then, if this is too much contrast, is take your highlight color in an airbrush and lightly spray it, and that's what I did here. You can see the after effect on her hair. I gave it a very light coat, and here you can see what I did. Just a light coat of white. I just took matte white and put it over top of it. And what it does is it just dulls down the contrast. You still get the contrast and the volume, but it's not as crazy contrast, so it just looks like light gray. So it's not a big deal. If you start with the darker gray, just give it a little bit of a white coat. And then I put her hair in place, and there's her portrait now with the front part of her hair, which, by the way, again, for any designers out there that are watching this, if you guys make, the designs that we all love to print and paint, keeping the hair separate from the head is a humongous bonus in my opinion, because it makes it so much easier to get to that portrait. So with that on and in place, we have a beautiful looking black cat model. Give her a twirl and off to the show. Alrighty folks, if you like this model and maybe you want to paint it for yourself, check out my website, relentlessstormmodels.com, where you can actually get this model and many others like it. I have well over 500 now, and I have paint and supplies coming soon. Also, check out my Patreon for additional content like this and get some more insight from my workbench. I hope to see you back here next week for another video and another beautiful model.